I think the first thing I should do is probably set the age limit and delete particles at age limit. So I'll bring those two nodes in first and foremost, and we'll make some room in our ice tree. I'll plug this into port 3 and set a very low age limit. Now I need to actually increase the speed of these particles because muzzle flash comes out at a fairly high rate of velocity, so the speed isn't set quite high enough. So if I take my age limit down to say 0.1 of a second, actually I almost have like a torch going here, a blowtorch. Just change that by opening up our speed, our emission attribute, and we'll set our speed to something considerably higher. At the moment, if I take the particle rate and I just set the rate to say 1,000 particles, we can see the emission streaming off, and I'm going to use the same modulate value over time that I used to set the emission of the bullets. Now again, everything's triggered by this weight value on the trigger layer, so eventually that's going to come back in to modify the rate. So I'll start by taking, just stop this here, I'll start by taking a value compound, if I can spell it correctly, value, and let's look for modulate value over time, and use that initially to drive the rate. So we get an emission, and it doesn't look like it's dying off very quickly. The first thing I'm going to really do here is set all of the keyframes in here to a spline interpolation. I don't really like the default interpolation of our graph. I'm also going to put it on loop, and so we're getting a loop value now. I can actually set the loop to be a small portion of time, and I can also fade the rate off over time using my curves. So what I'm going to do here is start off with 0 rate, ramp up very quickly, and then we can actually just die off. So you can see here I'm getting this stop-start emission. And I can play around with the rate, of course. Make sure that the emission is lasting as long as I want it to. And in my case, I do want to have a fairly short duration for the emission. Just want the emission to get out there as a muzzle flash and then disappear. So I'll actually set the duration a bit lower to say 0.6. Okay, that's not actually looking too bad. Now what I'm actually going to do is modulate this base value. I want to have quite a lot of particles coming out when the muzzle flash does turn on. So if I up this to say something like 10,000 particles, I'm going to get a very solid stream. Now I want to link all of this back to the weight value of my trigger layer. So if I turn the trigger layer off, I want no particles to be emitted. As you can see, no tracers are coming out. And as I turn it on, the tracer values are initialized and emit at a fairly high rate. So to do that, again, we're going to pull in our trigger layer as a single scalar value, and we're going to use it to modify the base value. So if I look in here and I choose another randomize, I'll do a random value. And of course, I want to take the weight value, which is a value between 0 and 1, and I want it to equate to my base value when the weight is at 1. So again, we need to multiply our weight value by a scalar, or just multiply the two together anyways. I'll just bring in the multiply by scalar, as it's going to be a scalar times a scalar, and use that to drive my mean value. The factor I want to multiply by is, we'll say 10,000, so that when the weight is 0, 0 times 10,000 is 0, 1 times 10k is 10k. We don't need any variance, and we'll use this random value to drive our base value. So if I turn this off now, nothing happens, and of course as I turn on, we get our animation over time. I can play around with the duration a little more. I have a very short duration. There we go. And I can even play around with the function curve, so if I want the emission to last over the duration a little longer, I can do something like that. So everything's looking pretty good here. Perhaps I can even play around with the start frame of the emission, so we get a little bit of an offset there. So everything kind of happens at the same time now. So we're starting from a rate of 0, ramping our way up through the duration to our full emission rate of 10,000 particles per second, and then ramping off over our duration. So between 0 and 1 maps our duration. Now I want to go in and I want to spread these particles out so that they actually look like a muzzle flash instead of a straight line of streaming particles. So I'll close down some of these property pages. I'm again going to leave my animation mixer open, as that's kind of key to working with this entire effect. I'm also going to set the muzzle flash before I move on to kind of a more orange color so we can differentiate it between the bullets being emitted. Okay, so let's go on and create some spread.